Okay, welcome family. Today we're going to be cooking eggplant parmesan with chicken. This should be the first recipe on my channel, so I'm excited. And as usual, I'm going to start with everything you'll need to make this delicious dish. So of course we have our handy dandy extra virgin olive oil. We have some regular mozzarella. I usually go for whole milk, but they didn't have it. We have some regular Parmesan cheese. I usually like shaved cheese just because I like the bigger chunks, but you use shredded or grated for this recipe. We also have garlic salt, oregano, chicken breast, canned chicken breast, and some regular pasta sauce. I prefer the tomato basil garlic for this recipe, but it doesn't really matter. And we have an eggplant. So the eggplant that you see here is clearly bruised and battered. It doesn't make it a bad eggplant. I wouldn't personally prefer it. We don't all need perfect eggplants though. It's not that serious. I mean, there's a whole company called, I think it's called like Imperfect Produce or something like that, where they sell like, vegetables that don't look aesthetically pleasing, so they typically don't get bought. But I do think that for the most part you want an eggplant that is heavy, I think, for its size. That's usually the guidelines that they give when you're buying eggplant. And I generally like the ones that are deep in color as opposed to the pale ones. And that's pretty much it. So in terms of tools, you are going to need a saucepan. For this recipe, I do recommend a deeper saucepan. Like, there are different kind of pans in, like, when you get like a set of pans. You can have like a really shallow saucepan, or is it even called a saucepan at that point? I forget the word I'm really going for. Maybe it is a saucepan, but like a shallow one. And then you can get one that's more deep, that's used for making stews. I would go with the deeper one for this recipe. If you only have a shallow one, it's really not that serious, but I would recommend the deeper one, especially because the eggplant itself is very big at first, but then after a while it will cook down. You're also going to need a 1/4 teaspoon for this recipe. You're also going to need a full tablespoon, and you're going to need a 1/2 cup measuring cup. I usually like to reuse my measuring cup, so you'll also need 1 cup, but you could also use your 1/2 cup measuring cup twice. You're going to need a knife, a nice cutting knife to cut the eggplant, so make sure it's big and sharp, and a nice little cutting board. So we finally got to the cooking portion of this video. I started filming right after I was about to start cutting the whole eggplant, and I was like, wait, no, you're supposed to film the whole thing. That's why you're making this meal. So I cut the top off the eggplant, and now you'll just see me cutting the eggplant lengthwise, or along the longer axis. And I'm just gonna dice the eggplant. Honestly, it doesn't matter how you cut it. The original eggplant parmesan recipes that I learned this recipe from, they usually cut the eggplant into rings and then they bake it in a baking pan. But since we're cooking it a little differently in a pan, like on a stove top and everything, I'm just gonna dice it. You can dice it large if you want larger, bites. You could dice it smaller if you want smaller bites. I will remind you or encourage you to keep in mind that the eggplant cooks down pretty significantly, so the dices that you'll see me end up with seem pretty large, at first maybe, but they do cook down pretty significantly. Eggplant has a lot of water. In fact, let me throw up some Eggplant Benefits. Oftentimes, I'm not gonna lie, I don't know the benefits of a lot of the vegetables I cook with. I just know that it's a vegetable, and so I trust it. However, if you do have issues with nightshades, then you may want to avoid eating eggplant. Nightshades include regular tomatoes, not sweet potatoes. Sorry, regular potatoes, not sweet potatoes. They also include tomatoes and eggplant. So, I did make this recipe for someone, or I made a different eggplant recipe for someone, and they ended up throwing up because they forgot they were allergic to eggplant, but I conveniently reminded them. But yeah, so, keep that in mind, and let's go to the stove. So here we're going to measure out 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Usually for a stovetop dish where I need, to fry or cook something in olive oil, I usually just use 1 tablespoon because a lot of these meals I treat as like one meal, like 1 serving for 1 person. And I grew up in a household where oil was abused. Oil was definitely abused. I'm not against oil, but you don't have to soak your food in it. So I try to limit it to 1 tablespoon. I find that you usually don't need more than that. However, eggplants love to soak up oil, and I feel like they need a little something. So like, honestly, you could even add more oil to the eggplant, but if you have a good non-stick pan, you can even get away with just using 1 tablespoon. But I did decide to use 2 tablespoons for this recipe. The eggplant takes a long time to cook, and especially if you're not using a non-stick pan, you might find, your eggplant start to burn because it doesn't have enough oil. So if you are using a non-stick pan, you can get away with using less oil, and the eggplant will, eventually cook down and release some water and not burn on you. But I will say I am really conflicted about putting this recipe in the 15-minute meal playlist. I really want to, but I know it doesn't take 15 minutes for eggplant to cook. I mean, it might take actually 15 minutes just for the eggplant to cook, but then it wouldn't be a 15-minute meal because you also have to cut the eggplant and do all the other things, which don't take up a lot of time, but I'm trying to be honest and truthful with you guys in terms of the time commitment for these meals. So yeah, as you can see, I just put the eggplant on the pan, and you're just gonna watch it cook for a couple minutes. That's really all it is. And we're gonna use garlic salt. So in total, I ended up using like I have a 1/4 teaspoon there, right? So I ended up using 3/4 teaspoons of garlic salt at first, and I felt like that was good on its own. Towards the end, after I added the pasta sauce, I kind of felt like I should add another 1/4 teaspoon of garlic salt. So in total, I used 1 teaspoon. I don't think it was too much salt. My mom really always gets on me for like making my food too salty, and I'm trying to listen, but I also personally drink a lot of water, so I don't have high blood pressure problems, but I might one day, who knows. So yeah, I ended up using 1 teaspoon of garlic salt in total, so you might just want to use all of that in the first step as opposed to waiting over time. Adding salt earlier on as opposed to later on could help the eggplant cook faster, because the salt will help to dry out or to bring out the water. In fact, there are many eggplant recipes that I've seen, specifically eggplant Parmesan recipes. Specifically recipes that kind of bread the eggplant in some way. I think I noticed this when I was looking into like zucchini fries, and then I found out about like eggplant Parmesan. A lot of recipes, regardless, they tend to salt the eggplant and then leave it out, and then they come back later and dabble off the water that's in the eggplant. I don't think that's necessary, because I really, part of why vegetables are so good for you is because there's so much water in there. So I don't really think you should be, trying to take the water out of the vegetable. Kind of defeats the purpose in my mind. Maybe not entirely, but whatever, it's a fitness channel. So anyway, now we're here with the chicken. I really don't know why I felt the need to film this. It's common sense, but I for most, if not all, my chicken recipes that use canned chicken, I do recommend that you drain out the water. And I really don't know the kind of the fat blobs that are on the top of the can. I don't think you saw it in that last clip, but yeah, you'd have to drain out the chicken. Then I add it to the eggplant. Mind you, the chicken is already cooked, so you could honestly add the chicken at the end. I just kind of felt like it's nice to have the eggplant cook with the chicken so that part of the chicken flavor can be passed on to the eggplant. And I really feel like from here on out, you're just gonna watch the eggplant cook over time. Like it's really not exciting, but enjoy nonetheless. Oh yeah, also what you'll see from time to time is I'll test the eggplant just by poking it, because to the extent that you cook the eggplant is really up to you. I like things very soft, so I really cooked it down. I don't know if eggplant is one of those vegetables that loses a lot of its benefits when you overcook it. I know you can eat eggplant raw, but it doesn't taste bad. It might taste a little bitter, but it doesn't really taste bad. It's just, I like cooking things that are, really cooked. So I should also add that I cook this recipe on pretty high heat. I tend to use high heat when I'm cooking just because it makes things cook faster. And I do recommend it for this recipe. It's really up to you if you want to use high heat or low heat, but I recommend using high heat because eggplant takes a while to cook and you don't want to slow that process down using not so high heat. So here you can see me like tasting the food, which is something I encourage you all to do, because if you cook the whole dish, hold on, I'm about to start dancing because I love how it tastes so much. Watch. It's coming. There. Okay, anyway. Yeah, like you want to make sure that it's coming out the way it's supposed to come out. Of course, always keep in mind that you really can't take away salt. It's hard to fix adding too much salt. But I mean, if you end up adding too much salt, I would just encourage you to add more of the other ingredients that don't include salt, but like more eggplant if you have some, or even more pasta sauce. But you do want to make sure that there is enough salt. At this point, you want enough salt that, the eggplant and the chicken taste good on its own, but it doesn't necessarily feel like a finished meal, because there's still other ingredients. You still have some cheese that has its own flavor. You still have some pasta sauce that has its own flavor. And especially anything else, like for example, the Parmesan cheese in particular that adds its own salt, you want to make sure you leave room for that salt and that flavor to shine. Also, there's really no need to constantly stir this dish. I just want to put that disclaimer out there because that's kind of like all you see in the video. There's actually long stretches of time where I just let the eggplant cook, and that's really what you want to do, but you do want to, stir it from time to time so it doesn't burn. But yeah, you don't want to constantly stir it. It's just not necessary. So as you can see, the eggplant is pretty cooked down. It's pretty soft. Now I'm just gonna add 1 cup of pasta sauce. Yeah, there's not much to this step. I'm just adding 1 cup of pasta sauce, then I'm gonna cook it for a little bit. I think I'm showing half a cup measuring cup on the screen, even though you can't see the measurement title. Side note, if you're buying measurement utensils for the first time, make sure that there's some sort of reliable way to have the title of each measuring cup there. Because for example, these measuring cups, their titles are raised, but when I bought some measuring cups in Las Vegas, I bought it and it was just printed on, and most of the labels washed away within the first or second wash, which was really inconvenient. Thankfully, I could tell like what a 1/4 teaspoon is, what a tablespoon is, what half a cup is, especially by comparison with other utensils in the set. But you really want to make sure that you have some good measuring cups. So as you can see, I'm just kind of, mixing everything around, and I'm doing another taste test. After this taste test, I kind of felt like I should add the last 1/4 teaspoon of garlic salt. Also, by the time you add the pasta sauce, you don't really have to cook it any further. So I just kind of turned off the fire at that point. But I personally would recommend that you add the mozzarella quickly after, which is coming up soon, because I like my cheese to be melted when I'm eating it. So if you add it while it's still hot, then the cheese will melt pretty easily. So here we have another taste test just to make sure I didn't add too much. The reason why I have so many taste tests and I'm adding garlic as I go is because normally I just kind of freestyle and shake it out from the bottle. But since I'm presenting this recipe to you guys, I wanted to make sure I had measured amounts, and I didn't even realize I was adding like a teaspoon before, but I guess that's approximately what I was adding. So here I'm going to add half a cup of mozzarella, and then I'm going to mix it in. Wanted to add a quick note on mozzarella. This note also applies to Parmesan cheese, but mozzarella, I mean, I'm not going to say it's healthy for you. That's a bit of a stretch, but it does offer it has some redeeming qualities. There's a lot of protein in it. I think they said like 16 grams for like a quarter cup or something. And there's also, a decent amount of calcium. I happen to have like small bones, so I love me some calcium. So yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to add that in there just because I think cheese has been demonized recently. And I mean, again, it's not like a health food, but it's also not the worst thing for you in moderation. So here we're going to add 1 tablespoon of Parmesan cheese. Since I'm using shaved Parmesan, it's not going to be easy getting exactly a tablespoon. And honestly, the Parmesan is for like that added last bit of flavor, and it also serves as a garnish, so you can use as much as you want. I clearly added a bit more than a tablespoon because I just wanted a bit more, and I felt like for aesthetic purposes I wanted a bit more Parmesan. And last but not least, we're going to add some oregano. Oregano is not only good for the smell, it also does impart some pretty good flavor. I don't know how much I use. I would just encourage you to sprinkle some on. I guess you can use too much, but I clearly used a lot and it didn't really ruin the dish. So, use your discretion, use your discernment or whatever. And we're done. That's eggplant Parmesan with chicken. I'm gonna roll out the price per meal soon and the nutrition facts, and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye!